Hi, I'm Kylie, an incoming freshman at MIT, and I'm here at the Twin Falls City Park to tell you about how my college interviews went. Let's get started. Okay, let's start off with MIT since that's where I'm going. And so for MIT, I got this really chill millennial girl, I think, who was into architecture. She had her own website with all her architectural work on it and stuff, and so I made sure to look at that before the interview started to kind of get a feel about what this girl was about. And so she called me up on Skype and we did a Skype interview. That's how most of my interviews went. And so the MIT interview actually had the most unique questions, and I think that's how they try and make it. So she asked me lots of the typical interview questions, but then for example, I'll give some examples, like why do you want to go to MIT, like what's so appealing about it, that kind of thing, typical interview questions. But she also asked me unique questions such as, if you had infinite time and resources, what would you do with it? And so like my response to that was that I would go travel the stars because I love astrophysics and astronomy, and with infinite time you can go anywhere, and with infinite resources you can build whatever you want to, go wherever you want. So that was kind of my response to that. So they had some really interesting questions in the MIT interview, and like I said before, I think they make it that way. So yeah, that was the MIT interview. Caltech didn't give me an interview, but Stanford did, so I'll go over Stanford's. And so for Stanford, I also got this really cool, chill millennial dude with typical glasses and stuff, and he actually lives and works in Sun Valley, which is closer to where I live in Idaho. And so he had some sort of dilemma going on, so he had to reschedule a couple times, so he was kind of embarrassed about it, but the interview went smoothly after we actually got started. And so with the Stanford interview, he was just a really chill guy. He asked me just typical questions. I don't remember anything special about it, but I remember asking a lot of questions about Stanford, and he being very enthusiastic about me asking questions about Stanford. So yeah, that was Stanford. Let's do Harvard next. So for Harvard, there was actually no alumni near me, and so I got a direct Skype call from a admissions officer, which was kind of cool. But because of that, the Harvard interview was the most intense out of all of my interviews. The admissions officer, she just like bulleted me with question after question after question about not only about myself, but about things I've done, my experiences with them. So more about like my achievements and like things I put on my application essay, because she had read my application essay. Usually your interviewers don't have access to your application other than like your name and where you're from, and so you actually have to go and explain all of that to them. But since she already had all that information, she could just like ask question after question about the stuff in my application. So that was very interesting. And once I got into Harvard, she actually wrote a special thing on my letter of congratulations, saying like, oh, I enjoyed our talk, if you have any more questions then feel free to ask me, and like all that kind of personal touch to try and get me to go to Harvard. But it didn't fool me, I still went to MIT. But yeah, that was a very interesting experience. Okay, so how about Princeton next? So I didn't actually get into Princeton, and I think this is part of the case, my interview, because the guy who interviewed me from Princeton, it was the only phone call interview that I had, and he didn't let me answer very many questions at all. Like, he preferred to talk about himself and the influence Yale had, and so all I could do was really just listen to him speak. He didn't really ask any questions. Like, he asked one or two, and then he was like, yeah, that's all the questions that I have. Do you have any about Princeton? And so I kind of had to fill the time with questions about Princeton, and I don't think it left a very good impression about me. And so, yeah, that Princeton interview didn't go so well. I hope yours goes better if you decide to apply to Princeton. Next is Yale. So Yale was the only in-person interview that I had. And so we met up at a Starbucks, and we both ordered drinks and then sat down, and she asked me questions in a more personal one-on-one style. And so we sat across from each other at a table, and she would just question me, just typical questions, but she went more in-depth in the personal side of me. So about my family, the relationships I had, the problems that I had, how did I deal with family issues, that kind of thing. So it's very interesting in that Yale had a more personal touch on interviews than the other colleges. I don't know if that was just the interviewer herself or if it was like just Yale in general, but that was my experience with the Yale interview. Next is Dartmouth. So with Dartmouth is a very outdoorsy school. So most of the questions asked to me were about like, what kind of outdoorsy stuff do I like? And so I kind of focused on talking about how I like to go ice skating, how I like rock climbing because of my dad, and scuba diving, things like that. And so apparently Dartmouth has a river that goes through it, and so the interviewer really focused on the river and the opportunities for outdoorsy stuff that the river has, and also like the Greek culture that's very famous at Dartmouth. I asked some questions about that, and he also talked about that. And so Dartmouth, yeah, overall is just very outdoorsy. If you're not into outdoorsy stuff, I would recommend not applying to Dartmouth, because that's one of their main things is like you have to be into the outdoorsy activities. Yeah, so that was Dartmouth. So those were my interviews, and I hope that kind of shed light on how interviews from famous colleges work. I didn't get any interviews from the UC schools that I applied to. I don't know how that works. So if you have any questions about interviews, how to do them, some advice on your answers and questions and things like that, leave a comment and I will answer it, or contact me in one of the ways that I will leave in the description. So I'll see you next time. Bye.